Never before, really, have I seen such a cruel and morally bankrupt budget. It dismantles our nation's basic living standards, which Americans have turned to for decades. This budget, and you know this, it will push millions of people into poverty and over the edge. This budget destroys people's lives. This budget, what you're doing is you're asking people to fend for themselves, and you're really leaving them out in the cold. And our moral obligation is to make sure that every American has a decent standard of living. This budget is a broken promise, and it's really a betrayal to every American in favor of tax cuts for millionaires, billionaires, and corporations. I'd like to just ask you, how are people going to eat when they need a temporary helping hand with a cut of $190 million in food assistance? Then you add these onerous work requirements, and then yet you cut $1.3 billion in workforce training programs so people cannot be trained or retrained for jobs, which I don't see much in terms of investment in job creation in this budget either. How are people going to get health insurance with a cut of $1.3 trillion in Medicaid? And how are people going to get a house to either purchase or rent with the elimination of the Housing Trust Fund and a $2 billion cut in rental assistance? You're forcing families to choose between putting food on the table and a roof over their head, and that's just downright wrong. You're forcing them to choose between life-saving prescription drugs and higher education. Again, that's wrong. And I guess I just have to say, with looking at these percentage of cuts, EPA 30%, Department of State 29%, Ag 20%, Education 13%, Housing 13%, Interior 10%, Health and Human Services 16.2%, Department of Labor 19.8%, Department of Commerce 15.8%. You wipe out the Minority Business Development Agency, the Department of Transportation 13% cut. For the life of me, I just have to remind my colleagues that Steve Bannon said that part of the goal of this administration was deconstruction of the administrative state, and I think what we see here is really the elimination of the public sector. And so, Director Mulvaney, I just want to ask you, one is, are these SNAP cuts, for example, how do you think people are going to survive when they need this helping hand? Most people on SNAP don't rely on this for a lifetime. It's a bridge over troubled waters.
Thank you, Congressman. I'll deal with a couple of things in reverse order if I can. SNAP, as I may have mentioned, I've forgotten how many times I've answered the question.
And also, let me remind you, Secretary Perdue mentioned that it was a program that was working. Why fix it if it's not broken? And he appeared to not be aware that you all were going to recommend these cuts.
Yeah, I think it's reasonable to ask if you had 28 million people on SNAP before the recession, 47 million people on it at the height of the recession, and 42 or 44 million people today, it's not unreasonable to ask if there are folks on SNAP who should not be, because we should have seen that number go down. SNAP should be counter-cyclical. It should go up during bad economic times and come down during better economic times, and we've not seen that. The EPA was a promise that the President made.
But Mr. Mulvaney, at least 20% of people eligible for SNAP don't even receive SNAP because of stigma and other reasons. So there are more people who need SNAP benefits.
That may be. Let me deal with the every American deserves a decent standard of living. Does that include our kids?
And you have a 13% cut in the Department of Education. Those are the most vulnerable kids who need.
What about the standard of living for my grandchildren who aren't here yet, who will end up inheriting $30 trillion in debt, $50 trillion in debt, $100 trillion in debt? What about their standard? Who's going to pay the bill, Congressman? That's what this is all about. That's what this new perspective is. Who is going to pay for all the stuff you just mentioned, us or somebody else? And I suggest to you, if it's important enough for us to pay to have, then we should be paying for it. Because right now, my unborn grandchildren are paying for it, and I think that is morally bankrupt.
I have grandchildren also, and I want to make sure that they have the opportunity to get a job so that they can help pay for our government, which is a government that should be enhancing the standard of living and making sure everyone has a chance